Welcome to Deep Thought. Digging deep to heal. Yeah, you know what? Things are interesting. I'm gonna tell a story. I recently saw a friend of mine, and she has a book out, and she's talked about this in a book that she has out, right? She was talking about an incident that happened when she was a young woman. Where a gentleman tried to date rape her, right? Very traumatic. And then she connected that to later in life when she had not one but two miscarriages. Because she determined, because of that heinous incident, she definitely wouldn't have wanted to carry like a man's child to term. Now, she has two children. She's been able to heal somewhat. But she connected that to her miscarriages and then connected that to failed business opportunities. And it's a deep book. I have to talk to her first because about sharing the book. Because, yeah, it's public, but I'm going to see what type of crowd she wants to get. And I might definitely share it on my women's channel when it comes out, because it's very important. But I didn't want to make this the subject of the book. This podcast, the subject of that. But it's interesting, both good and bad, where the origin of something is. And it's something to look into. Like on a good thing, like I made it clear, whatever I like in a woman, and y'all know I like a big booty. But a certain type of booty. But one thing that really turns me on about a woman, particularly a black woman, I'll say that, particularly a black woman, is natural hair. It really turns me on. I think it was two things that did it for me because I really thought about it. One, my mother, when she was younger, had a habit of wearing wigs that really got on my nerves. I was like, ugh. And two, I remember when I was about 8 or 9, I used to like this little girl at the church I went to. And she was, this at the time, it would have been called more like the Back to Africa thing. This is 70s, Black Power. You had some people really get into, with the dashikis and the natural hair bushes. So this little girl's mother was into this. She wasn't married. But I had a real crowd. My grandmother knew about it. I used to just look at her. She was the ultimate woman for an 8-year-old, right? And I think looking back at that imprinted me. Like people who follow my main channel know I talk about the womb imprint for women. But for the men, it's an ego imprint. We imprint it in our minds. And, it wasn't like a one-sided thing. She showed that she liked me, too. She was a pretty little girl with a natural fro. Pretty little girl. And plus, she was like the star of the children's choir. So I was like, man. I was like, yeah. Shoot, that's ultimate for a little kid. Shoot. In retrospect, wondering what's up with her being in the church. But, you can't have everything. And that goes in another thing. But anyway, right? Wait, hold on a second. Had the coffee. I didn't need to hear that. Man, this weather. Anyway, right? And I thought about that because I was like, I really get turned on by a natural hair woman. Like, really turned on. Like, I just prefer it. It's like, if a woman got her hair processed or something like that, or even a weave, if they're cool peoples, I'll deal with it. But if you want to get me on a deep level, that's it. And I thought about that. I was like, oh, wow. Now, that wasn't a bad thing. That was just an example. But with everything, with everything there's light, with everything there's dark. Now, twist that around. What if I had an aversion to natural hair women because instead of that little girl being generally friendly to me, she was negative. In fact, I think back to a couple young ladies who had natural hair. I remember this one young lady who liked me. I didn't like her as much because she was just slim. She was just too slim for me. But she had a natural hair. But looking at her, she probably the type grew up would be Pal, because she looked like a miniature version of what's her name? Cicely Tyson, because that's what the teachers do. And looking back at her, and actually that had an impact on me, because there was a woman I dealt with who looked like she could have been Cicely Tyson's daughter. Like imagine Cicely Tyson built like Tina Turner, and that's how this woman looked. And so that had an impact. But say my experiences with natural hair young ladies, little girls and stuff was negative. Like the experience was only positive, always positive, right? But say if it was negative. I want y'all to think about that for a second. Say if the experience was negative, what would be my experience now? Would I have bothered going to this expo? Or would I have married a woman who keeps her hair natural? You know? And I mean, those are the only type of women I actually approach out in the street. If I see a natural hair, I'm like, hey, how you doing? I love it. But what if it was a different response? How would that affect me? You know, would I be one of these dudes who's saying, hey, you better have a weave? And there are some dudes like that. There are some dudes like that. You know? But the point of it is, no matter what, you got to look deep. Why? Like, there's a lot of people walking around, there's a lot of women walking around with some deep wounds they need to deal with. A lot of women. Because at the same hair show, the actress Jennifer Lewis, now she has a book out called The Mother of Black Hollywood. And if you look at Jennifer Lewis's career, she had always played somebody's mother. Either mother or auntie. And she do have like that kind of tough love, maternal energy to her. But she recounted how she had been sexually assaulted at 15. And, you know, she was dealing with some issues. I'm going to tell you what. Whatever somebody has, people need to dig deep and ask questions. Like real questions. Like, and this is one thing Miss Lewis was saying, because I mean she was on stage, she was making us laugh, but then she was hitting us with some deep stuff to think about, you know. And this is something I thought about anyway, because you know, a lot of times when we talk about these relationships or anybody or how somebody's doing something, we see what they're doing right there, and if it's very negative, but a lot of times we don't say, okay, where did that come from? You know, where did that come from? So I was just like, where did it come from? And it could be deep. I mean, a number of boys and girls, or men and women out here who have been molested as children. That's deep. You know, you don't know how that affects them. You know, I'll throw a name out there because he's been very public about it. Tyler Perry. He was molested by men and women. You know, a lot of people complain about him talking about that Medea dress, but how much of that goes back to that molestation? You know? And then speaking of young men, I remember watching an Oprah show where she had a bunch of men who had been molested, including one former pro football player. And I've had conversations with a lot of guys in private. The number of men who got molested as a young man by some older male is high. And you don't know how that affects them. You know, and I know almost to a man there was some issues dealing with women. Not necessarily they were gay. Let's be clear on that. Though I've heard of occasions like that. But it could mess with somebody's own sense of who they are. You know, you have to dig deep. And it could be anything. I mean, the sexual thing is very common. But it could be something else. It could be something... I remember I've mentioned on another channel a couple times how I used to work in the criminal justice system, right? And I remember a story I heard. It was about this little girl who was accused of burning down this house. And the person who related to me believed that she didn't do it. And she got caught up in the system. because they thought she did it. I don't know if she was exonerated later on or what happened, but it affected her because you going through the system through something as a little child for something that you didn't do. You know, so there's always there's trauma. There's trauma. Sometimes the trauma could be very minor. Sometimes the trauma could be very minor. It could be something as simple as trying to control when your child, how your child goes to the bathroom. No, and it could be that deep. Because you have some people out there, there's a specific class of people out there, a specific personality type is actually caused with parents who try to control their children too much. You have to give them a certain amount of autonomy, but see, sometimes you have a parent who try to create like a little robot or something. And I mean, every little instant, they'll do it. Like, I dated this one young lady, right? And she had that. I remember, like, before she dated me, even she was about 26 at the time. She had dated a young juvenile delinquent, like about 6 years younger than her. Like before we went out, all right. And then, that actually kind of turned the woman on. I mean, she did whatever, but to understand, you know, the why, it wasn't even about sex. It was about her mother didn't like that person because, you know, I met with the woman and I remember I was over her house and I remember there was a family gathering. And, you know, the daughter, you know, the ex-girlfriend was doing like something for her. It was totally bougie and all of that. Her mother, even in front of all these people, her mother was directing her like almost the whole thing. Like she was the puppet master. And I was just like, wow. You know, telling her how to stand, how to say something. I was just like, are you kidding me? She tried to be a little bossy with me, a little manipulative. I just looked at her. I was just like, wow. No, it's like I was respectful about it, but I was like, no. But that makes a big difference, you know. So if people, you know what, people want to heal, figure out why they do stuff. Sometimes you gotta go back. Now, it's one thing to talk to somebody like me, you know, a coach or something like me, but there have been times I've told people, look, you need a more professional help on this. I can give advice, but you might need something deeper on this. You know, you got to dig deep. And because a lot of times something happens and people put it out their mind. People put it out their mind. You going to put it, people naturally put something unpleasant, but the effects of it is still there. So that's the thing. You know, if you got some issues, you got to dig deep. Why? You got to dig deep. Why? Because, I mean, I've met some people, and I still say there was something. And you know what? It don't have to be as a child. I've met some women just because, particularly women, just because their first sexual experiences were usually some bullshit that got messed up. Seriously, that first time, I would tell any woman. I know women want to go out and have sex, but that first time, it's not the complete. Like the complete imprint for a woman is maybe 3. I always say 3 men, but it can really just be 2. And quite frankly, it could just be 1 because that one sets the tone for the next one and the next one. There's so many women out there. Their first time was with some random dude or some dude who took the pussy. Let's just be real. He might not have been raped, but you know, especially you get a lot of women, the first time, young girls, their first time was with some older dude. You know, they in their teens and the dude's in their 20s. The dude in their 20s just trying to bust something. He trying to bust something because the typical man in his 20s is not thinking in terms of tantra or making love and handing candle lights and all that stuff. He just trying to bust a nut. You know? So, and that could be traumatic to a lot. I've met a lot of women, their first time, and that can be a trauma. That can be a trauma because then you get some women, they never get past that trauma. You know, and that's actually a big factor in why a lot of women have trouble. You know, it can be depending on the circumstance, it could be a trauma for a male too. dependent on it. I mean, it's and that's one of the things. You to deal with any issues you have now, you gotta dig deep. You gotta dig deep. Get a therapist, somebody who get a safe space to talk. If you don't want to talk to a therapist, find your minister, your spiritual advisor, whatever path you choose to follow. But that's the thing. You just gotta dig deep. Anyway, that's it for now. I want y'all to think on what I'm saying, and ultimately, when you digging deep, is ultimately you digging deep, and so that you may rise and transform. So peace and blessings.